Hi
Hello.
everyone.
Hi.
Thanks for inviting us along this afternoon. And we've got we'll share our screen in a minute. We've got some images to run through while we're talking. But yes, do ask any questions if you think of anything along the way. Okay.
We've prepared a few sort of bullet points for ourselves, but we are a bit of a double act, I think.
Yeah.
And so we haven't really prepared anything too much, so we might sort of talk over each other a little bit. So we'll share our screen now, and just nod if it's being shared okay. So hopefully you're seeing our shared screen. And as Louise says, we've got quite a few pictures to show you, photographs of our sessions, at settings, at early year settings, at libraries and at our sites. And we've got a couple of short films that we'd like to show as well, just a few minutes each, which, and I think that these pictures sort of, in a way, they speak volumes. They say much more than we could ever explain, really. So anyway, to start with, a couple of pictures of our two sites where we've been working. What you can see here is the Rural Life Museum in Glastonbury. And we worked in some early year settings and libraries local to the Rural Life Museum, culminating in some sessions at the Rural Life Museum. And
this is the Museum of Somerset in Taunton. So they're both managed by the South West Heritage Trust. There are other sites that we're hoping to work at as the project continues, but we mainly focus our activity around these two sites. And so Hannah's already mentioned that the South West Heritage Trust became an NPO, an Arts Council NPO. That was last year. So we've just completed our first year of the NPO programme. And there are 5 activity areas. One of them is early years and libraries, which sort of explains why we've started to develop this programme. And Richard and I both joined the trust for the NPO programme. So I'm the programme manager. And
what am I? I'm the community curator. But actually the two roles sort of work really well in tandem with each other, don't they?
Yeah.
And your background is in sort of museums, isn't it?
Yeah, so in museums and galleries, and not specifically with early years, but in learning teams. And I most recently worked for the National Trust, and that was working on a sort of creative programme, but it was more about working with artists and commissioning. So we brought, we'll talk about artists a bit later.
Yeah.
And
my background's more in the sort of facilitating side of things, and working as a artist, working out in the community. So my learning curve in terms of working with museums over the past 12 months or so has been really steep. But I had quite a lot of experience in early years prior to this NPO work, so was able to bring that to this job. But I think we were reflecting a little bit on what we wanted to talk about today, and I think we realised that what was really key to the work that we've been doing so far on the NPO programme is that idea of going to settings and working with early years practitioners, working with children in their own space, and then building on that foundation to look at, what kind of objects, heritage objects, children are interested in, and then thinking about bringing those children into heritage spaces. So we're going to blast you with lots of photographs that kind of demonstrate that idea.
And our overall NPO programme is the stories that make us. So each of those activity areas fits into that. And originally, this was going to be about early years and libraries, working in partnership with the the Somerset Library Service, which we have been doing. But as Richard said, we sort of took a step away from that and thought that we would actually start the work in settings and starting on you know, working with practitioners first before we started to work with other venues.
Yeah, so we visited a lot of settings in South Somerset, didn't we?
Yeah.
Which is a very rural part of Somerset. Some of our objects that we brought with us, you saw a telescope in the last object. There's a rocking horse just behind that little person there. And they're looking through a Viewmaster. And we brought some hats with us. And so in terms of heritage objects, I think one thing was that we bought objects. Initially, we just bought objects that weren't toys, but, you know, were sort of functional real world objects for children to explore. And it just happened that, you know, quite a few of them were from the stores here at the Heritage Centre. One star item was our gramophone, which we actually purchased specifically for this early years work. And, you know, that objects with levers on them and things that you can turn that were clockwork, mechanical objects, things that made a noise, all that kind of sensory stuff was really quite popular. We got to know the songs of Noel Coward really, really well.
So we worked with two of the curators here at the Trust, and initially we were able to just sort of explore the stores which were new to us as well, being new staff, and just sort of see what we could take out, what was feasible, what could be handled. And we started to put together a collection, and that just grew. We also work with our learning team, and we have a schools loan service. So we were able to utilise some of the objects from that. And as Richard said, we then supplemented with other objects, and we loosely started to develop different themed areas, which were technology, sort of fashion, dressing up, natural history, art, engineering, science, and life in Somerset. So we were, and then we sort of out of that grew the Fascinating and Curious Museum, which we toured around. So that's what went to settings in various guises, depending on their space available, number of children, that kind of thing. So it was an adaptable, portable museum.
So yeah, we've got a small person here with our typewriter. The GPO telephones were really, really popular. Again, they were sort of, you know, handleable. There was things that spun around. And what was interesting, actually, we took all sorts of objects, but all of the children, 3-year-olds, knew what the telephones were, and then they knew that they were telephones and that they had a spinny thing and you could speak into them, which was really interesting, I thought, because we're so used to sort of mobile phones, you know, but the telephones were a real winner. There was one really interesting moment where we were chatting to some of the children and getting the Fascinating and Curious Museum ready, and we have these cloths that we put over some of the objects so that they can be revealed. So we were just getting ourselves set up, and one of the early years practitioners described one of the children as non-verbal. They might not respond, they might not speak to you, but what was really fascinating for us was that the telephones, actually we've got a great picture that demonstrates it in a minute. The telephones were a really great way of children communicating with us and with each other, and even those children that would in the normal way be quite quiet.
So we toured the Fascinating and Curious Museum to 8 settings in South Somerset, and actually they came on quite a journey with us. So they took a bit of a leap to work with us as we developed this museum, and they said that they hadn't really had heritage opportunities or creative heritage opportunities. So it was all quite new. And I think they were, you know, pretty much, we had comments that they were just, it's quite surprised at how the children engaged. They didn't think there would be so much interest. They were talking about language development, especially in some of the children that were less verbal. So they were surprised by that too. So there was a lot of sort of verbal feedback from the settings, and that's one thing that we need to do more of in our next phase, is to evaluate it more fully, I think. Yeah. Which we know we need to. Yeah.
Often when we were planning with the settings, we'd ask the practitioners to move the toys to the side. And so we were going into an empty space. And, you know, I suppose that could be quite a risky strategy, in that you've got, you know, 15 children who just want all the ride-ons or whatever, and they're not there. And we've bought the gramophone and the Viewmaster and the telescope. And these, we bought quite a few, we've bought a bit of taxidermy with us as well, some animals. So, you know, the kinds of objects you might see in a museum. But actually, you know, our fears were, we didn't need to have those fears, because the children didn't miss the toys. They really enjoyed engaging with the objects. There was also no hierarchy of objects either. So, you know, you might go to a setting and there's a favorite toy, or there's a best toy. But we came along with a van full of objects that children hadn't seen before. And so there was a sort of level playing field, and all of the children were equally fascinated all at the same time, sort of thing. And there was also a sense in which the objects, the heritage objects we brought with us, were enough, that they were an end in of themselves. We didn't have to worry about making tangible things. We didn't have to worry, when we were at the setting, about creating an activity as such. We simply created the space. The Fascinating and Curious Museum kind of sat within a space, and we prepared the space and curated the space, and then the children filled that space with themselves and with their ideas. We didn't need to, you know, have that activity.
No, so the sessions were really open-ended, and it was all about sort of encouraging curiosity, encouraging exploration, and sort of, you know, they were fascinated to find out how things worked, and to touch the objects was really important. And you know, that was another thing that the settings found helped to meet some of their requirements of the EYFS, that sort of curiosity learning. So there were lots of outcomes, but we didn't, you know, we didn't concentrate on trying to make things or have creative activities going on. It was all about looking and discovering.
Oh, for some reason it won't let me go on. Oh yeah, there we go. Sorry. We've got here, well, we were calling it a praxinoscope, and I'm not quite sure if that is actually what it is. Somebody might correct us later on, but this is an animation toy, and, you know, we really enjoyed watching the children engage with these objects, and they did engage with these objects at quite a deep level, really. And, you know, with this object, there's a requirement to do quite a few things simultaneously, and it's that whole use of motor skills and everything's there's a lot going on here. But we found that with this object, for example, you spin the handle and you need to look through the little slots, and you see a looping animation, and the children just got it, didn't they? Really. And we some more examples of some technology. We took a cine projector, and this is that thing I was just talking about, which was the conversations that we were able to have through the telephones, which were just wonderful. We did actually revisit one of the settings who asked us to go back. They often invite some of the residents from the neighbouring retirement home over, and they were very keen for us to go back and combine two activities, 2 sessions, and that was interesting, wasn't it? Having the 2 generations together. Now there's this person in the corner there that you can see drinking a cup of tea. That's David, who we asked to accompany us to some of the sessions. David is a Somerset-based poet, performance poet. And though, like Louise was just saying, it was very much about not having outputs necessarily. It was about the here and the now, you know, the sort of being in the moment with the objects. But we did want to try and capture what had happened in some way or other. So we asked David to accompany us to a few sessions, and we made a film with him. He wrote a poem, and we filmed it here at the Heritage Centre, and we're going to share that with you in a moment, if that's okay. But I think there's a quick video before. Oh no, it's this one. This is it. So this video,
just a couple of minutes long, isn't it?
Yeah. Hopefully you'll all see and hear it, and it features David. He came along only with a notepad and a pencil and took notes, listened to what the children said, and created this poem for us. So hopefully it'll play if I press that button.
I've got a ticket. I don't know what it's for, but I'm hoping it involves a dinosaur. I'm waiting by a rope. I'm waiting ages. Then I go inside the... What's it called? What's it called again? A museum? A museum? A museum? A museum. Oh, I know what that is. I've been to one before. It had aeroplanes in the roof and fossils on the floor and red things and purple things and... Oh, is that a hat? Am I allowed to try it on? And... Oh, blimey, what's that? Look through here. Twist the end. I'll tell you what's inside. Flowers, rainbows, stars and crabs, crafty bits and butterflies. Wind this up, then set it off, and it goes round and round. That goes there, and this goes here, and then it makes a sound. Golden treasure, cold and icy, purple crystals, sharp and spiky. Look at me, I'm riding home. That's not scary. Telephone, a singy thing to put music on. Are they real butterflies? Hello, hello, is anyone there? I'm a pirate, bye. Click, there's a picture. Click, there's another. Click, Sleeping Beauty and a fairy godmother. Now there's a statue, now there's a tower, now there's a moo cow. And I don't know how a thing like that's supposed to go. Is it a percutor? Or maybe a piano? I can see the birdies. I can see the floor. I can see a teapot and a dinosaur. He's fierce. A T-Rex. He could be my pet. I could call him Rachel. Has he eaten yet? Can he break houses with his massive jaws? Does he eat sausages made of other dinosaurs? I'm not scared of him, but please don't let him out. How old do I think he is? Ooh, I think about 6, 11, maybe 21. Older than that? Really? What, older than my mum? seeing all these old things, being all these old things, has made me feel brand new at the museum. The museum, the dinos coming through-seum, the bolts out of the blue-seum, the lots of things to do-seum.
I'll move it on to the next slide, I think.
Yeah, so wait,
Should we skip through that one?
we might not have time.
Yeah, we might not have time to show. This is Charlotte, one of our early years professionals who we met at Toy Box Nursery, but we're going to skip it through because we just wanted to give you time to ask us questions, and also to just tell you how we developed the work in the early years settings through to libraries and then through to our site. So
So we didn't say at the beginning, but the trust at the two museums that we showed at the beginning does have an early years offer, which are based within the museum. There's a toddler story time and there's toddler explorers, which is a more in-depth session. But the NPO work allowed us to sort of take that in a different direction, which is where this came from, really.
So we went to neighbouring libraries that were near the settings that we'd visited and invited those children and other local settings who we hadn't visited either as well to come along and experience the fascinating and curious museum at their local library. And that was interesting because suddenly we were in a public space. So we had sort of passers-by engaging as well, which was good fun. And we worked with an artist and explored the idea of shadow play. And we looked at, so this was, I suppose, moving on from the settings, which was very much about being in the moment. In the libraries, we did work with an artist, and it was about providing an opportunity for the children to interpret the objects through a thing. So children made puppets. So we had various animals in boxes that we took. So we had a mouse, and you can see here, this is actually us now starting to take our work into the museums. So this is a picture at the Rural Life Museum where we had 2 projection screens. So you can just see at the bottom right hand corner there, actually there's a badger, and there's a few other objects that we were taking out to the settings and the libraries with us. And children work with the artist to create shadow puppets. And just to round things off, this is just a few pictures at the Museum of Somerset, working with an artist again to look at not just the fascinating and curious museum objects, the portable objects, but also the permanently sited objects in the museum. And Sarah, our artist, worked with children to create hats that were inspired by the natural history collection here at the museum. And yeah, there's just a few observations here. Early years practitioners commented that the interaction touched on areas of the EYFS. The majority of early years settings we'd visited had no prior experience of heritage opportunities, though they'd had perhaps artists visit and they'd had those creative opportunities. The idea of the museum coming was something that was new to those particular settings. Although I think some of the settings that we'd been to that were attached to schools, the offer had been made to some of the older children perhaps in the past, but not to the preschool classes. And you know, that this working at the grassroots level has allowed us to build that really strong and ongoing relationship with the early years sector, and that these experiences are shaping the future of the NPO project. I'll stop sharing now. I can figure out how to escape, I think.
At the top.
Stop sharing. There it is.
Yeah.
And just to round off with you actually seeing us rather than the PowerPoint, we just wanted to round off with some things that we've learned. That's okay.
Yeah. So, well, we learned that sort of the decision to work with settings has really paid off and has enabled us to build very good relationships. The communication through them to families has also helped to raise the profile of what we're trying to do and to encourage some of those families to engage with the libraries and also with our museums, which we're going to develop over this second year. So that's been really, really valuable. And we're at the point where we're now sort of juggling a little bit, working with some of those settings again, so that we're not just moving on to somewhere completely different, but also bringing in settings from other areas across Somerset as well. So we'll be continuing those relationships.
Yeah, and the choice of objects was really important. We wanted to take objects that appealed to curiosity. So objects like the rocking horse and the gramophone, objects where you could see the workings, the mechanics of the object were particularly useful. But then that kind of set the scene where we could share objects that had slightly more subtlety to them. Like we've got some butter pats and we've got a large teapot, and then introducing the animals in boxes, and we've got a slide viewer that children really enjoy looking at, and a box full of slides featuring kind of rural scenes, tractors, farming paraphernalia, all sorts of things like that. But the animals were really interesting because they provoked conversations about the animal. What is the animal? Where do they live? What do they eat? But also conversations about life and death. Usually the first question when an animal was shown was, is it real? And so we had to think about how we responded to that question.
With the artists that we worked with, the choice was really important. So we wanted to find facilitators that had a really interesting practice, but also who felt confident in working with really young children and adapting their practice to suit that, and to be really flexible as well. So the sessions were all slightly different depending on so the age of children was primarily sort of 2 to 4 or 5, but some younger. Some of our sessions in the museums were during holiday time, so we would also have maybe older siblings, and it was all more about the families working together, so that was really important. And much younger, sort of babies were brought along as well. So it was a whole range and different needs of children. So through the library service, which is a partnership that we're continuing, we're starting to look at their SEND provision. And so the libraries were really valuable to work with because they already have their own networks, and they're already doing quite a lot of work with early years children and childminders, or sort of toddler groups, or dads clubs, all sorts of things that we could tap into but offer something slightly different. So we're continuing that and hoping to work more with Somerset County and their early years team in our next phase. I think that's
it.
We'll stop talking.
So if any, we're happy to have a conversation about our experiences and continue to sort of compare and contrast what other people are doing. Yeah.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Louise. Thank you, Richard. Fascinating insight, and really lovely to end on your on the things you've learned, because I think being able to share those is so important as we all embark upon this work. Does anyone have any particular questions or queries? By all means, pop your electronic hand up, just wave madly at the camera. By all means, come in on that. You've stunned us all into silence. I mean, I was very interested, particularly in sort of that kind of progression as well, sort of. So whether or not, I guess it's very hard to tell on an individual basis, but whether you've seen any of the groups that you went out to specifically coming back into some of your museums, is that something you've been able to monitor? Or?
We have been able to monitor that, because although the sessions were free, to participants, we did have a booking system. So in the libraries, we had to do that because it was all different size libraries, so they had different capacities. So we used Eventbrite actually, and then we could monitor. We were able to open the bookings on there for 2 or 3 weeks when it was only open to people that settings that we'd worked with, and we just used a QR code, so we knew that people were booking from those settings, and then we opened it up to
more widely,
a wider audience. And so eventually in the museum sessions, we know that 26% of the participants came from either the libraries or the settings. And we obviously got to know some of the families as well that we saw at different places, but the libraries were really well attended from settings because they were very local to them, and because of the sort of geographical nature of Somerset, they weren't necessarily near to either one of the sites that we were working at. So that was a bit more challenging, wasn't it, to get people to then progress to the museums, I think. Would you agree?
Yeah, I'd say so. And something that that's a learning thing as well. So something that we can address in our second year as we develop the project. Yeah.
It sounds like it's that kind of going into the setting where the children in particular feel incredibly safe and they know their environment and everything, and maybe the next stage is their local library where again they might have been before, and then to sort of develop that relationship further to new experiences and new places to visit. Sounds fascinating. We've got a couple of virtual hands up. I think George was just in front, so George, do you want to come on screen?
First, but I was just love the interaction you had between the children and the care home people. It just reminded me of one of the nicest things I ever organised when I was gainfully employed in a museum. I used to be asked to do the children's events, and there was one event that I wasn't completely happy with, but I wasn't organising it. One of the curators was going to do a event with children's games, and she had wanted to teach children at a local school some traditional children's games, which I thought was it was actually a very 19th century crappy idea. Well, the idea was to teach the children's games, and they would demonstrate the children's games to the public. Anyway, this curator left, and I was asked to take over this event because we had advertised it. So basically all I did, I put out a load of skipping ropes, drew a hopscotch thing, found some hoops, and just put them around. And it was a great event because suddenly parents were teaching the children, and the interaction was fantastic. Grandparents came and they were teaching them the skipping rhymes and things that they had, and it's just that nice interaction. And I assume you had that nice interaction with the in the care home and young children.
Did, and that's interesting, George. There was when we took the Fascinating and Curious Museum out to settings, and then we had that kind of intergenerational session as well at Toy Box Nursery. There was a lot of adults kind of modeling, I suppose, saying this is, they would automatically, for example, pick up a telephone or or react in a certain way when we unveiled the T-Rex, for example. But there was also children. It was also really evident that children were able to express their imagination quite visibly to us, and we're having imaginary conversations on the telephones and telling us all sorts of wild and wonderful things about some of the animals in boxes. And actually, we did mention this earlier, didn't we, Louise, that we didn't go into this wasn't an opportunity to teach. It was an opportunity for children to experience the heritage objects. So we didn't, we did talk about this T-Rex being around, a certain time in history, 65 million years ago. Although there was one child, I don't know if you were at the session, Louise, and they'd obviously been doing dinosaurs, and they were able to tell us so much about this creature that they saw. But what they were also able to demonstrate to the adults, I think, was their imagination and how they interpreted and reinterpreted what these objects were all about, which was really
but I
nice.
think the adults did enjoy, because some of the objects that they were quite familiar with, others maybe not so much, but they just really enjoyed watching and observing the children engaging with the objects. So that a lot of that, and the same in one of the libraries actually, because we sort of knew already, but we also came to really appreciate what the libraries do in the community. And some of the libraries we went to, they had lots of other activities and adults coming and doing all sorts of things who would then gravitate towards what we were doing and be able to engage with the objects. So it just happened quite naturally, I think. Yeah.
Thank you. Hayley.
Yes, thank you very much. I just wondered, in terms of length of session that you did, so where I've run things before, and you talked about not using activities, I've specifically relied on activities in a way to give it some structure, but it is the unstructured part where children can explore and learn the most, and that's exactly what I'd like to involve. So just really some questions around the structure of it, the length of it, what happens if you kind of get to a bit where you don't know what to do, or doesn't it get to that?
All the sessions were around 2 hours long.
Right.
The settings, they did sort of divide the children up into smaller groups, and we just had a sort of
about 5 or 6 children.
Yeah, and we didn't really know. It was a bit of a testing thing to see how long they would engage. So and usually around 20-25 minutes, and then we were having to swap groups because of the time. So I think we were quite surprised at that, how long they wanted to stay. And then they had the practitioners would come in and say, oh, you need to let your friends come in now. So we were quite surprised at that, of just looking. So we talked a bit at the beginning, and we unveiled things like Richard's mentioned, and then they had time to really just explore and go and see what they wanted to look at. So yeah, around 20 minutes at a time for smallish groups. It was different in the libraries. We still based it all around a 2-hour session, didn't we? But and we tried to encourage people to come along at the beginning, and then they could stay as long as they wanted.
Yeah.
And usually that was around an hour and a half actually, which was also quite surprising. And the same in the museums. And then we did have people that obviously couldn't get there for the beginning and would turn up halfway through. That was fine too. So it was very fluid.
Yes.
It really was very unstructured, but it seemed to,
I think,
work.
And I think as we gained in experience, we started to build our confidence in allowing the children to explore freely without any interference from, obviously adults came and created the environment, but but then having that confidence to step back and allow the children to lead and to show us objects, and for us then to be surprised, oh my goodness, that's interesting.
Which they did a lot actually. They would discover something and they'd really want to share that with us as well.
And I think we tried not to actually, we tried to, I think, restrict the amount of interpretation and explaining, and just it was, when we planned it, we'd written on paper that it was about a child-centered approach, and allowing the children to interpret the objects in their own way, and we stuck to that. And actually, we found that that was an approach that worked really well.
Yeah,
in all cases, really. And actually not having an activity allowed time for those unexpected things to happen as well.
Yes.
We weren't saying, oh, it's now 3 o'clock, we now need to do the activity. At 3 o'clock, we actually allowed the exploration to continue, and they continued to show us amazing things that we'd not thought about ourselves.
Yes. And then you also talked about how using that to inform your offering at the museum for the under fives and the early years age group. So how will you sort of incorporate what you've learned into then what's done there to change what's currently in place, or adapt it?
Yeah, well, because we're sort of working alongside the current offer, which will remain because it's quite well established.
Yeah.
And it's quite interesting how we're sort of thinking around marketing all the different things and how that's understood by our audiences. That's something we need to really work out. But I think which we tried to do with the museum sessions was to use the galleries, be out in the galleries, not just in the learning spaces that both sites have. So the one of the images we showed was in the barn at the Rural Life Museum, and that was a really lovely sort of setting, wasn't it? So we tried to incorporate, the artists were really helpful with that, ways of exploring the collections and the displays and bringing that into the activities that we're doing. So I think definitely more of that, so it becomes more integrated. And I suppose it's really about families feeling comfortable, because we were really trying to work with settings in areas that, you know, have lower cultural engagement. So it was about just making it a welcoming, safe space for families to come and visit with really young children. And I think going forward, we want to use the NPO work to develop more resources for families that visit any time, any day. I think that's where our relationships with the practitioners will be really key, because they were very involved in the sessions in their settings, and we want to work with them to help us develop more of an offer, more of a permanent offer as well, in our museums, and not just the two, but hopefully across all of our sites.
Oh, it sounds wonderful, really wonderful. I think it sounds absolutely amazing. Well done, really good. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Hayley. George.
Yeah, I was just sort of
George.
put my have I got me? Yes, I have. Putting my conservator collection care hat on. I just want to, I'm not going to say anything to I just want to say to everybody else, my experience with young children and objects and collections, they're very careful. They back off. I play an East Anglian dulcimer. It's 19th century, probably early 20th century. If it was in a museum, nobody would touch it. And I'm happy when I'm out playing or with children for them to have a go. And they are the gentlest, they hold back. And I think this is the same with you probably found this with objects, that the children are a bit diffident at start. So for those that are worrying about their collection being damaged, it's probably unlikely it will be, because the kids will back off.
We found that, haven't we?
There was what's been really interesting about the project is the respect, really. In fact, that's what you're talking about, George, isn't it? Really? It's respect for each other and for the space that we've created and the objects within that space. And, you know, I suppose we have been aware of that from the beginning, in that we wanted to create that mutual respect between ourselves as the museum and the early years practitioners and professionals that we were working with, who understood the children better than we did. And then by extension, you know, have that respectful relationship with the children. And that came out of, I suppose that just came out of an approach which was clearly one that put them at the heart of it. So we created a space. The children explored the objects in its simplest form. We weren't teachers, and there was no moments where we were creating any tension or anything like that. And like you say, George, the winding up of a gramophone, putting a 78 on it and putting it's quite a skilled process, really, but a little bit of modeling of how that works, how you do that. We found the children to be really respectful of the objects. Yeah.
Fantastic, and great motor skills, knowledge.
Yeah, exactly.
And fine work. Catherine.
You're muted, Catherine.
Don't know if we can get you to unmute, Catherine. Click on the audio button.
Does that
work?
work?
There we go. Yes.
And we've got you.
I'm going to make a joke about somebody actually muting you for once in your life. But
I was just going to say, we had an exhibition at the Castle Museum in Norwich a good many years ago now, and it was a hands-on sort of exhibition, and the curators were persuaded to get one or two objects out of the store that we could actually let people touch. And the natural history department found a stuffed barn owl.
Yeah.
And I thought that won't last. That won't last. And I expected the whole thing to dissolve into feathers within a few days. But do you know, the children came up, and the minute they touched the feathers on that barn owl, they were so gentle with it. I couldn't believe it. And that barn owl was in as good a condition at the end of the exhibition as it was at the beginning. And I mean, that taught me something, that if you trust people, even young children, they will respect the object and treat it with respect.
Yeah.
And I think that's just, it's amazing. And I certainly learned a lot from that.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And we're just at the point where we're back with our curatorial team thinking about what we can take out for our second phase. So we want to, we are working with some of the same settings, maybe some of the same children, but so we want to refresh the fascinating and curious museum. So it's been good for us to be able to demonstrate exactly what you're saying, that great care has been taken with all of the objects that we've taken out. So yeah, we're able to then think of a whole new collection that we can go and share.
Yes.
With these young children.
Yes, and they love rocks and fossils.
They do.
Like that. Endlessly fascinating. And dinosaurs, of course.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, unless anyone has any other questions, I'd like to wish you all the very best for your next set of programs, and please do come back and tell us more about your experiences as you develop it on the next stage of its journey. It'll be fascinating to hear where you are working with the same children, potentially 12 months on, which is a long time for early years audiences in terms of their own development. It'll be interesting to hear how much has stayed with them on their journeys. So huge thank you for your time this afternoon, both Richard and Louise.
Nice.
Thank you all for coming along to our Chewing the Cud session.